And you'll find that on page 275. And then we're going to turn to Romans chapter 12. So both chapters 12, that makes it easy. 1 Samuel chapter 12, verse 1. Samuel said to the people of Israel, I've done what you asked me to do. I've given you a king to rule over you. And now you have him, he will lead you. As for me, I'm old and grey. My sons are with you. I've been your leader from my youth until now. Here I am. If I've done anything wrong, accuse me now in the presence of the Lord and the king he has chosen. Have I taken anybody's ox or anybody's donkey? Have I cheated or oppressed anyone? Have I accepted a bribe from anyone? If I've done any of these things, I will pay back what I've taken. The people answered, no, you have not cheated us or oppressed us. You've not taken anything from anyone. Samuel replied, the Lord and the king he has chosen are witnesses today that you have found me to be completely innocent. And then Romans chapter 12, which you'll find on page 200 in the New Testament section of the Scriptures. Romans chapter 12, and we're going to start from verse 9. Love must be completely sincere. Hate what's evil. Hold on to what is good. Love one another warmly as Christian brothers and sisters, and be eager to show respect for one another. Work hard and don't be lazy. Serve the Lord with a heart that is full of devotion. Let your hope keep you joyful. Be patient in your troubles and pray at all times. Share your belongings with your needy fellow Christians and open your homes to strangers. This is the word of the Lord. Well, he wanted to be remembered. And he was, and is, only not in the way that he had hoped. In order to help his people remember him, President Marcos built this huge head and shoulders of himself in concrete and had it put on the top of a hill so that people could always see him and remember what he had done after he had gone. And to be fair, there were some good things. During his presidency in the 1970s and 80s, the production of rice increased and the Philippines became self-sufficient. More than 1,000 rural banks were opened across the country. And access to free education was widened in a big way. Positive things. But yet most of those lost and forgotten. Overshadowed because of his dictatorial spirit. And many Filipino people, even today, hate his legacy. So much so that in December 2002, an attempt was made to blow up that concrete structure of his head and his shoulders. And many today would resist any move for his bones to be buried in what they call the Hero Cemetery in Manila. All because of the character that he showed. In the last 2 weeks, we've looked at two women, Abigail and Hannah, as examples of integrity. You might ask the question, well, are there any men of integrity in the Scriptures? And the answer is yes, there are a few. And one of them is this man, Samuel. Remember that word integrity speaks of something that is complete. It has grown and matured. It speaks of something that is whole or is in good health or good condition. It speaks of something that is sound, like the structure of a bridge that's not going to give way when a cyclist goes across it. Last week, we attended the birth and the dedication of Samuel, though we were thinking more about Hannah. Today, in chapter 12, we have listened to his speech at his retirement due. Well, not exactly. He is not retiring completely, but having appointed a king to lead the nation, he is going to step back. In chapters 13 to 15, we see him challenge the king when he does wrong. In chapter 16, he will appoint David to be the future king. But apart from just a couple of verses in chapter 19, when David seeks out Samuel for some advice and some support, we don't hear of him again. Not until we get to chapter 25, and then only to read simply that he died and the people mourned for him. They mourned for him because of the kind of leader that he had been. The godly character that he had modeled before them. The integrity that he had shown. And so what matters is not whether we erect some big stone monument of ourselves so that people never forget us. That actually doesn't really count for anything. But what does count are the lasting memories that we leave behind in the minds and the hearts of the people that we have lived our lives with. And that legacy is determined by the kind of people that we are. The kind of character that we have shown consistently. You may be a great accountant or an expert in IT. You may be the best teacher that your school has ever had or the best surgeon in the history of the hospital. But what are we as people? What godly character do we and have we shown in and through it all? Because the first thing I want to take from this chapter 12 of 1 Samuel is that he speaks of a lifetime of integrity. You see, the Christian life is not like a 100-meter sprint that's over in a little while and then we sort of, well, we've done that, we'll move on to something else now. The Christian life is not sort of a hobby that we sort of pick up when we've got a spare few moments and then put down again. Christian life is much more like the marathon. Although the marathon of life doesn't end until we take our final breath. And how we finish is equally as important as how we start. Now, a good start's important, but we really gain the respect of people through the way that we finish. A lot has happened between chapter 1 of Samuel, when he is born and presented at the tabernacle as a young boy, and his words here in chapter 12. Samuel takes a step back from public life. But in between chapters 1 and 12, there's been chapter 3. Perhaps still a fairly young boy or young man. He has to pass on a very difficult message to Eli the priest. You know the story well. Samuel goes to lie down to sleep one evening, and he suddenly hears someone calling his voice. So he gets up, runs to Eli and said, "I'm here." Eli says, No, just go back and go to sleep. Lie down, boy. And it happens a second time. And so Samuel gets up and runs to Eli and said, "You called me." And Eli goes, "No, will you please go back to bed?" Third time, Eli suddenly works out what's going on and tells Samuel, when the voice comes again, just say, "Lord, your servant is listening." In those moments, God speaks to Samuel. But it's not a happy message that he brings. And it's certainly not a happy message for Eli. And in the morning, Eli summons Samuel. Samuel, a young man. Eli, who's been priest for many years. to be looked up to and respected. And he says to Samuel, what did the Lord say? Tell me everything. Don't hold anything back. Don't cut anything out. And almost the first task for Samuel is to bring a hard message. Things become no easier in chapter 3. The Philistines have been coming and attacking the people of Israel on and off for some years. And they reach a very low moment, the darkest moment, when the Ark of the Covenant is taken away. Now, the Ark of the Covenant was simply a large oblong box overlaid with gold. So it had some value to it. But what was more important was that the 10 Commandments were kept inside it. And this covenant box was a symbol of the throne of the Lord. That the Lord was king of his people. And the Lord was present among his people. So when that covenant box is taken away, have they lost the presence of the Lord? Have they lost the help of the Lord? Have they lost the care and the provision of the Lord? Has that all gone with this box? And thankfully, Samuel is able to exercise that kind of ministry that recognizes that the box is just a symbol. The reality can still be true, whether or not the symbol is there. And the reality is that the Lord is still watching his people. The reality is that the Lord does still care for his people. The reality is that the Lord is willing to forgive and to bless his people if they will learn to look to him. But it's in that moment of real discouragement, the lowest point that they can get to, that Samuel is called to minister and to serve. And so it goes on. But Samuel exercises a faithful, consistent ministry year after year after year. There's a lovely little verse towards the middle end of chapter 7 that describes his ministry of a year. He went from one place to another, but always back to Ramah. And this he did every year. Every year when things were at their lowest and toughest. When things perhaps began to improve. Whether the people listened and changed or not. He was faithful and loyal and consistent in his ministry. He hadn't taken anything that wasn't his. He hadn't cheated anybody out of anything. He hadn't been harsh and oppressive to get what he wanted out of the people. He had treated them fairly and well. It was a life of integrity. And as we reflect for a moment on our lives to this moment, can we see something of that same kind of integrity and consistency? No, none of us are perfect. None of us will get it right all the time. But can we see something there of the integrity that we saw in Abigail and in Hannah and now in her son Samuel? Do we have that integrity within our marriages? Do we have that integrity in our homes? Do we have that integrity and that godly character in our communities? I was reading something the other day that there are many men and women who give time at the weekend to referee boys and girls playing football matches. But a lot of them are going to give up. They're not going to do it anymore. And that's not because it's wet and cold in November. It's not because sometimes the children shout or scream. It's actually because of the abuse that's hurled at them from the sideline by mum and dad. How do we model godly character wherever we are day by day? Samuel can stand and speak of a lifetime of integrity. That's what we should be holding before us. That's the aim that we should have. As husbands, as wives, as mothers, as fathers, as brothers and sisters, as uncles and aunties, as grandparents, as workers and colleagues and neighbors and friends. A life of integrity. But Samuel doesn't leave it there just hanging as a, if you like, a nice thought or idea. He really earths it in some very real nitty-gritty things. Integrity means not stealing. Samuel is actually able to ask the question, have I taken anybody's ox? You might think, well, that's a slightly odd question. I'm hardly going to ask the local farmer, have I taken one of your cows? Because we wouldn't know what to do with it, we wouldn't have anywhere to put it, and we certainly wouldn't like the mess that they would make. But in a rural economy, an ox was really prized. Because the ox could be used to pull the plough, to dig up the ground so that the seed could be sown. An ox could be used to pull a cart to the market. An ox could occasionally be used for riding. So you take away somebody's ox, and actually you deprive them of their livelihood, their ability to do their daily work. And Samuel says, have I stolen? Have I taken anyone's ox or their donkey? Have I cheated anyone? And he can stand there and the people say, no, you haven't. Some of you may have heard of Dr. Alan Redpath. And he says that there are 4 ways by which we come to possess something. One way is that we receive something as an inheritance through the love of a family or maybe other relatives. A second way is when we receive a gift or a present because someone appreciates us or wants to show their love for us. The third way that we come to possess things is when we work for it and we receive the wages that we deserve. And all those 3 have something in common. But the 4th way is quite different. It runs completely counter to that. Because the 4th way we come by something is when we steal it. When we take something that isn't ours. When we take something that we haven't worked for. And we take something that we don't deserve. And that goes completely against the idea either of a gift or of wages that we receive for working. When Paul writes his letter to the Ephesian church, he says, let those who have been stealing steal no more, but rather work. Now, this is interesting. Don't steal anymore, but work so that you have something to share with those in need. He doesn't say work so that you can pay your bills, though that's obviously really important. He doesn't say work so that you can feed your family, which is really rather necessary. He doesn't even say work so that you can treat your wife from time to time, which is a very good thing for a husband to do. He actually says no to stealing, but yes to giving away something, sharing something. This is the contrast that he's talking about here. And that's the godly character that we are called to. The integrity that isn't trying to grab something from somebody else that isn't ours, but what do we have that we can share with others? Not just in terms of money or a physical gift, but in terms of time, or of friendship, or of sharing pain, or of sharing tears. Moments to listen and to pray. Rather than wanting to take, what do we have that we can share? Because you see, most of us would probably say, well, I don't openly steal. I've never gone into Woolworths as it used to be and seen what I can take off the shelf. No, but what happens when you're given too much change? You either not worked it out because you're not very good at maths, so you go away and say, well, praise the Lord. Or do you hand it back? If you hand it back, you'll get the most amazed look on the shopkeeper's face. They will not understand what you're doing. But what if they know you? What if that's the shop that you go to most weeks? What if that's the shop at the corner you go for that extra something that you had forgotten to get? And you give it back. What an impression that makes. How do we use our time as workers? Are we usually late in, or as late as we can make it? If the boss goes off early, probably to see another client, do we try and slope off a little bit early? Or do we give the time that we owe to our employer? And what about our children? Now, I expect you're thinking, we're not going to steal from our children, not our little children. No? Ofsted are intent on putting books into nurseries. That is for children under the age of 5, with titles such as Me, Mummy, and Mum. You know what I'm saying? So I looked up on the internet what that book was all about. And I read a review. And the review said this: it doesn't teach about alternative families. It just simply includes them. But read on the next sentence. One of the lovely things about books like this is it normalizes these experiences. And the next sentence, all children should be taught that families come in all these different combinations. So is it teaching or not teaching? Hear me right when I say I don't think it's teaching at all. And I say that because a child under 5 doesn't have that mental capacity and ability yet to reason and work things out and decide what is appropriate and what is not. Therefore, it's not actually teaching them anything, it's forcing something upon them. It's foisting something upon them, whether they want it or whether they don't. And in doing so, we steal away their innocence and their childhood and a right way of life. We're called to be those who don't steal, but those who care and those who share. Samuel then goes on and asks the question, have I cheated anyone? Because integrity means not cheating. Do you remember that video we saw last week? Oh, so you're the mechanic. News had been going around about a particular mechanic who had his own garage. And he wanted to change the perception that people have of, not all, but some mechanics. So he wasn't going to cheat people who brought their car to his garage. He wasn't going to say that work needed to be done if it didn't. He wasn't going to use second-hand parts that he had polished up a little to look as if they were, well, at least nearly new. And he wasn't going to charge for work that they hadn't even done. Well, that was a surprise, and people began to talk about it. And so when he was introduced to somebody else, they said, oh, so you're that mechanic, meaning something really very positive. Well, we want to be that accountant, and that IT expert, and that doctor, and that mother, and that grandfather, and that uncle, and that brother. Known for our integrity. And integrity means not cheating in business. God is very clear to his people. Do not use dishonest standards when it comes to length, when it comes to weight, or when it comes to the amount. That sort of covers about everything. Why? Because I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt. So what they do in their business life is not disconnected from their experience of God's salvation. They're actually intimately and closely linked. Because he is the God who has saved us, because he is the God who has brought us into fellowship with himself, this is how we're to live. Now, that may relate to a rural economy. It may relate to an economy based upon all sorts of trades. But in business, it relates to the products that we sell. It relates to the services that we provide. And it relates to the time that we give to our employer. But integrity means not cheating in our marriage. And I don't just mean sexually. It's more than that. We cheat our spouse if there's never time to listen. We cheat our spouse if there's never understanding or compassion. And sometimes we need to sit down and reflect and remember, she's been my helper for all these years. He's been my friend all these years. Now, of course, we all have dull moments or periods within our marriage. Let's pretend that we don't. And some of that's just due to the endless repetition and cycle of life. We get up in the morning, we get washed and dressed, we grab a cup of coffee, we get in the car, we get to work, we work hard all day, we come home, grab something to eat on the way, or we cook it when we get in, clear it up, sit down for half an hour, and then we go to bed. And the next morning, the alarm goes at exactly the same time, and what do? We do it all over again. And if we're younger and we've got children, then that all has to come into the mix as well. Sometimes it just gets considerably dull and boring and monotonous. And that can affect our marriage. It can affect all of our friendships. It can affect all of our relationships. It's what those verses in Romans 12 is all about. Love must be sincere. That's where integrity comes in, when love is sincere. To hate evil means that we never give something that is a false impression. We don't say something that we don't mean. We don't promise or offer something actually hoping that the person won't ask, because actually we really don't want to have to deliver. Integrity is about sincerity. It's about sharing rather than taking. It's about being sincere and not cheating. Finally, it's about liberating and enabling rather than oppressing. Now, of course, when we hear the word oppression, we think of a dictator of a country. Or perhaps we think of child trafficking. Maybe someone who's put in prison for their beliefs. But to oppress someone can be much more subtle than that. And it can crop up in many, many parts and areas of our life. Because to oppress is to bully. It's to threaten. It's to put pressure on someone to do something that I want. We can do that in our marriage. And you say, well, no, I love my wife. Of course you do, and that's great, but we can still do it. We oppress if we withhold affection in order to get our own way. We oppress if we take control of the money and every penny that we spend, and we are the one who's going to decide. We oppress if we try and decide the timetable for our husband or wife and what they're going to do or not do. It can happen in our relationship with our children. You know, if words are harsh, rather than words that build up and encourage. If we have expectations that are totally unrealistic. It's interesting watching a little bit of the tennis highlights. There's a 15-year-old girl who's through to the second week. But because she's 15, the next year until she becomes 16, she is only permitted to enter 10 tournaments. To ensure her physical health, to ensure that she doesn't burn out. Because there have been occasions when mum and dad have so wanted the child to succeed, less perhaps for the child's sake and more for their own. And that's to oppress our children. We can do it in our workplace. if we're the boss or the manager or the team leader, if the demands that we make of our staff are unreasonable. It's great to be decisive as a leader and make decisions, but if we don't listen to the rest of our team, it's one thing to be driven. Do we really want to achieve the goals and the targets that are set? But if we have no compassion for those that we are responsible for, and yeah, we can do it in church too. We can do it in church too. Certainly the preacher can. If the message leaves us feeling guilty rather than empowered. If the message feels us put on rather than liberated to serve God. If and whenever we talk about money and the preacher says, we really need to increase our giving, and we're like, whoa, we go away feeling guilty because some of us are not in a place where we can do that at that point. Or we talk about prayer meeting, and of course it's essential for us to pray. But maybe there are some of us that actually don't get home until 8 o'clock or 8:15 in the evening. So easy for us in church to pressure rather than to liberate and to enable and to encourage. But Samuel is able to talk about a lifelong integrity in which he hadn't taken anything, but rather had given his life to the people. He hadn't cheated them. He hadn't oppressed them. Rather, there had been a sincerity in all that he did, and a desire to liberate and to encourage and to build up. Now, of course, if we take that seriously, if we aim for the same kind of life, then that's going to affect our prayer life, isn't it? You ever come to pray one morning and thought, what am I going to pray for today? And wondered what you were going to do? Well, if we want to live a life of integrity, and if we want that for our brothers and sisters within our church family, then there's plenty to pray for every day of every week, without anything else. How does it affect the way we think about Sunday? How important Sunday is? It was Bishop Taylor Smith who said, make work your worship and worship as you work. In other words, don't separate the two. You hold them together. But how can we demonstrate godly character in our workplace without the place of worship on Sunday? Yes, we get tired. Yes, we get exhausted. Yes, there's a mountain of things to do at home and in the garden. But we're never going to be able to model godly character without time together with God's people to worship, to share with one another, to hear one another's stories, and to pray for one another. So we all serve as priests, listening, hearing, encouraging, praying, and sending one another out. So that into the week that lies ahead, we live lives that are full of integrity. Like Abigail and Hannah and Samuel. Let's pray together.